So this is the second video of the Percy Jackson and Harry Potter series, and this specific video will be about the Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone, whatever people call it. The following week after this, I'll be doing the comparison between the first two books. Other than that, everything in this video will be traditionally the same format as before. If anything's confusing, just go to the description and you'll see how I break everything down. So the first chapter of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone or Sorcerer's Stone, it actually starts with the world around Harry Potter, and all these people are celebrating at the fact that this, evil-ass wizard named Voldemort had died. Apparently, some kid named Harry Potter is the reason why Voldemort is dead, which is confusing because this Harry Potter kid is literally a kid. This guy's a baby, and somehow the most evil wizard of all time seemed to have just died because of him. So in the first chapter, we actually see someone that we won't get to know for a while, named Dumbledore, and another person named Hagrid, bringing Harry as a baby to this family called the Dursleys, so that they can take care of this baby, Harry Potter, because his parents had passed away because of Voldemort. We get to know that Harry is this sort of hero, but he doesn't even know it yet. And Dumbledore goes on to say that if he grows up knowing that he's a hero, that can change a lot of things about someone, because fame and all this stuff changes a human being, especially if they grow up into it. So we then get a fast forward to 11 years later, where Harry Potter grew up in this house of a family called the Dursleys. The Dursleys are Harry's mom's sister's family, and it turns out they're pretty shit. They basically keep him in a room under the stairs, which is like super cramped, and they just treat him like shit. And the only son of this family is always bullying Harry, so he grows up with like a very, negative upbringing. For some reason though, Harry doesn't understand why these people are treating him like trash. We just keep getting hints that, Harry is one of them. He's a different kind of human. Like, it's just, they keep alluding to a fact that there's something different about Harry. Fast forward a bit, and Harry suddenly starts getting mail from out of nowhere. It starts off with the front door coming in, but when Harry finds out that the mail's for him, the parents of the Dursleys rip up the mail. And then the next day, 2 mails come in, and then so forth and so forth. Until eventually, they keep ripping up the mails, and like a swamp of these mails just keep coming at him. No matter what happens, these guys just keep ripping up the mail. And then one day, a guy named Hagrid, the guy who we knew earlier as the person that took Harry as a baby to this family, shows up at the front door and says the famous line, "You're a wizard, Harry." So it turns out Harry is, of course, a wizard. He didn't know it, but his people around him knew it. The Dursleys, they all knew, and that's why they always treat him like shit, because he's not really normal. He's not human, to say. It then gets revealed that Harry grew up his whole life thinking his parents were killed in a car accident, but that's not true. It turns out that all along, Harry believed that his parents were killed in a car accident, which wasn't true at all. It turns out that Harry's parents were killed by this wizard named Voldemort. And then Harry finds out that somehow he's the wizard that killed Voldemort. He's confused as fuck, because he doesn't know anything about how anything happened. He just knows suddenly he's just a celebrity in this wizard community. And it turns out Hagrid's popped up. This guy, big ass guy, popped up and is telling Harry that he's invited to this school called Hogwarts. He decides to go to this school, and we get introduced to a lot of the world. There's a place called Diagon Alley, and trains that have like stations that aren't really there. A bunch of other like magical elements. We also get introduced to the fact that Harry ends up with a wand, and he gets an owl named Hedwig. Harry goes on this train, and on the train he meets this kid named Ron. Now Ron has this big ass family, and they're all poor. They become friends. And unlike Percy Jackson, what's different here is we see like the friendship develop on screen. Versus in Percy Jackson, Percy and Grover were just friends, and we were just told that they were friends. So it's a bit different in that sense. There's not actually a concrete place where the story begins, to say the least. I figured the best way to like stop the introduction is right there, because there's no real goal in the first book of Harry Potter, which is very different than what we're used to. Most books we're told are like, oh, Percy Jackson, he has to, prove his innocence in The Lightning Thief. Or in The Hunger Games, for example, Katniss is chosen to participate in the Hunger Games. But none of that happens. It's just Harry becomes a wizard and goes to this school. And the actual goal of the first book is not really clear until much, much later on. So that's basically it for the introduction. So I actually think the introduction for Harry Potter is very unique, in the sense that we're not really shown a perspective change right off the bat. but the first chapter is not really from Harry's perspective. So I think that's actually a very unique take on the intro to a story. And as you see throughout the other Harry Potter books, that's something that happens in the 6th, 4th, and I believe the 7th book. There's always like a different perspective that we're introduced to right off the bat, and then we get to see from Harry's perspective. So I actually thought that was a very, very unique like twist to it. And then there's also in the beginning chapters, we know there's something different about Harry. We know Harry's this hero, but it looks like Harry's just this normal kid to the Dursleys and all these other people. So it's rather unique to the reader to have known information before the main character knows that information, in an introduction especially. So I thought that's a very unique thing. I also really liked how explorative it was in the beginning. We get to discover a lot of what it means to be a wizard with Harry. We get to see him, you know, pick his wand or find I guess an owl, if that's the thing wizards do. We get to see the whole process, and I thought that was like really, really, really unique. Or just really interesting. I wouldn't say unique. So I think where Percy Jackson's introduction was better was that there was much more excitement right off the bat versus Harry's, which is a bit more slow. But personally, I found the intro for Harry Potter, that slow, you know, process of seeing everything with Harry, very, very interesting. Personally, I'd give the introduction like an 8 out of 10 because I was interested enough to want to see where everything is going. So in terms of characters, what I personally found really interesting about Harry Potter was that Harry was a relatively flat character throughout the whole story. He's got a lot of personality in certain sections, and then in others it just seems like he's very, you know, normal, to say the least. Like he really is just a normal kid you'd see anywhere. But I thought that was really interesting because his personality is just so flat, and I think that actually did the story a bit of justice because it really shows the colors of the characters around him rather than him. So for example, because he's so flat as a character, you know, we get to see Hermione, another girl, her intelligence show, or we get to see Hagrid, this guy that's like so full of personality, his personality show. And I think that's part of what makes Harry Potter as a character, because his lack of character thereof makes other characters shine more. So on that note, the other characters that shine, we get introduced to Ron. Personally, I always think about this. It's like, you know, Ron becomes friends with Harry because of Harry being this hero. And it's like, you know, there's like a bit of a like disingenuous friendship with that, to me personally. In the beginning, obviously just in the beginning. As we see later on, this friendship grows. But it's like, imagine you're friends with someone just because they're famous. It's just like, it just seems a bit weird, especially if that's the basis of the friendship. So I always thought that was interesting. That's not really like a critique on Ron. It's just something I noticed. Of course, Ron is a kid, just like Harry. I think in general, a kid might do that. So it's very accurate to what a kid might do, but I just think that's sort of like disingenuous of a trait. But that's just a personal critique. Ron is basically the Grover of this story. He's very funny. He's the humor of the story. But he's much more than that. We get to see that he grows up in a poor family. We get to see that, you know, people make fun of him because he's poor and a lot of other stuff. And he's always like insecure because he's poor. Very interesting like thing to look at, because a poor kid that's insecure about being poor becomes friends with this kid who's insecure because he's famous. It's like a very interesting dichotomy. We get to see a lot of Ron throughout the story, but for the first book, he was relatively interesting because of his background and his family. But other than that, I think he's just meant to be like comic relief in the first book. Again, though he's helpful, he's just a bit more, much more of a comic relief character, just like Grover was in the first book. But obviously that changes as the books progress. Now Hermione is the Annabeth in this story. Hermione is very intelligent, you know, very likable right off the bat, because she gets made fun of for being smart. And it's like, that's very fucking weird, you know what I mean? But when we're kids, I'm sure there's people that called other people nerds and all that other shit for similar reasons. Like, oh, someone's smart, person's a nerd, you know, it's like weird. But anyway, Hermione is very, very like stern. She's very, you know, personable. And the thing that makes her the most interesting is that she develops a lot in this first book. She goes from being, you know, this goody two-shoes character to doing a bunch of questionable stuff later on by school standards. And that's a good change. That's like interesting to see that change happen right in the first book of a children's book. So I like that aspect of her. There's a lot more characters, and personally what makes Harry Potter so good is that all the characters other than Harry have so much personality. And if you even covered who said what and you just had the dialogue, you would probably be able to know who said what if you actually read the story. And that's a testament to good dialogue. All the characters in this have very unique dialogue, and that's exclusive to these characters. You don't need to know who said it to know who said it, if you know what I mean. And I think that's like a talent of itself. I actually think I really enjoyed, even the annoying characters in Harry Potter. It's very interesting to see like how we see the story through Harry's perspective. I think if I were to give a character rating, I'd probably give it like a 9 out of 10. Like, I enjoyed so much of the characters in this. So much life and so much, personality. And actually, that's what I would have given if Harry was like a, very, very interesting character. But to me, Harry's just not that interesting. So I'd probably give it like an 8 because the main character is the heart of the whole story. And if the main character is not, super interesting, it kind of takes away from it. But it also is a strength because it shines in the other characters. All the other characters with personality shine so much because of that. So it's a bit of like a, oxymoron in a sense, but I think I'd much rather have, a much more interesting main character. So the story is written in third person, but it's very unreliable. And that's what makes Harry Potter very, very good. It's that we get the unreliable narration of like the story. We get shown things specifically for a reason, and the things that we're shown are shown in ways where you don't question it, but if you were to question it, you'd be able to solve things along the way. And I think that's what makes the first 3 books, especially for Harry Potter, so interesting. It's that, everything's always in your face. You could have picked up on this, you could have picked up on that, you could have picked up on this. But in general, when you're reading it, you're not paying attention to those things. But it's shown in front of you. And I think that's what is really interesting. It's that the mystery or the problem of this book is shown in front of you, the solution is shown in front of you, what's happening is shown in front of you, but you don't realize it until much later, and you go back and you're like, oh shit, that's why this was there, that's why this was here. That's why I personally like third person way more than first person, because you get to see a lot more. And in a first person story, you're very, confined in a sense. Other than that, I think the whole story was interesting from the beginning all the way to the end. Where my problem was with Percy Jackson. Now my problem with Percy Jackson was that, certain things happened and they happened for no reason. In Harry Potter, everything happens for a reason. We're introduced to every single small detail, and somehow every single small detail will make sense in the end. Nothing is there for no reason. And I think that's what is interesting, because when you're reading it, you're like, this isn't here for a reason. You're subtly thinking that. You're thinking she's just showing you the world, but as you go on, you think, oh shit, this was here for this reason, this was here for that reason, and that's why this makes sense. I think the first section of the Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone was really, really interesting, and like I was intrigued all the way through. And I thought this would be different because I'm a lot older now than when I first read it, but I still found myself interested in what was happening. And maybe it's because I knew what was going to happen later on. Even taking myself out of that shoe and seeing things for what it was, I was still interested to, get through the whole thing in one sitting. And that's a testament to how good this first book really is. I know it's a children's book at the end of the day, and I say that a lot in Percy Jackson and this, so some people might not get into it. If you can get into it, it's really, really like fun. I found it to be really fun to just try to solve the puzzle piece as we're going through the story. So I think I'd give the plot an 8. I thought it was really good. I thought it was like exciting throughout the whole thing, and I was paying attention to things that normally I'd be skimming over in other books. So yeah, the plot in the middle section was really, really good. Now the best scene, unlike Percy Jackson, it was very, very clear what the best scene of the first book was. In the middle of the story, at this Hogwarts school, it's Christmas, and all these other kids are going back to their families, but of course, Harry doesn't have a family to go back to. So he's just there, but it turns out his friend, Ron, stayed back with him. Now, they're just messing around in school, going around in random places. They have this invisibility cloak that they use to sneak around. And while they're sneaking around, they happen to find this mirror. And if you remember what I said in the introduction, this was my biggest critique of Harry Potter. But when I thought about it, it made so much sense. It's that the goal of Harry is not shown, but the goal of Harry is shown in this specific section. So while they're messing around, they find this mirror called a Mirror of Erised. And in that mirror, if you look in it, it shows you what you desire most. And it turns out Harry looks in it and he sees a family, because he's never had one. He's had, the Dursleys that kind of treat him like shit, but he's never really had a family. Right then and there, we're introduced to what Harry's want is in this story. In The Lightning Thief, like I said, Percy's goal is to get the lightning bolt. In The Hunger Games, Katniss's goal is to survive the Hunger Games. Harry's goal is not so distinct or so clear. We're just told, each book has its own problem, blah, 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 blah. But what Harry's want is, it's shown right off the bat. And that want isn't actualized in the first book. It's actualized throughout the story, which I thought is very, very untraditional, to say the least. In writing a book, you want your conflict to be resolved holistically in the first book, while still, carrying on to the other stories. In this first book, we're told Harry's goal is to have a family, and by the end of it, he will have one. That's the author's promise. The goals that we want are usually the goals that we meet. And I think that's so interesting, that the way they showed what Harry's want is, it's not, subtle. It's very in your face. This is what he wants. And I thought that's very interesting, because we're usually, subtly showed what the main characters want in the story. Or, small aspects of that goal are shown throughout it. It's never, in your face, boom, this is what I want, and this is what I'm gonna have by the end of it. So I thought the best scene was, amazing. There's so many times I think about that mirror, even after this story. Dumbledore being this OG in this story, tells Harry the happiest person would look in this mirror and wouldn't see anything. And you think about yourself in these situations. If I looked in the mirror, what would I see? And I think that aspect of this story is amazing. That, you wonder, if you were here, what would you see? If you were in this world, what would happen? But yeah, so this first book's best scene is one of the best scenes in the entire series. So I think this specific scene, I'd probably give a 9 out of 10. It's something I think about, often. And if you can think about a specific thing from a story much later on in life, that means the story did a good job at doing what it was supposed to do. So I think the best scene in this is one of the best scenes in the whole series. So unlike the Percy Jackson conclusion, where it ended on a twist and we are shown, who the real villain is and what they're trying to do, the ending for Harry Potter was much more mellow. I personally wasn't that crazy about this ending. It was just more so of it's almost like a they lived happily ever after type of ending, where, he goes home and the only thing you're known or told is that he can't wait to come back to Hogwarts again, this place that's now his new home. But I feel like the conclusion just wasn't, enough for me to be like, wow, that was a great ending. I don't have anything really negative to say about it, other than the fact that it just wasn't enough to me. So overall, I just give the conclusion maybe a 5 out of 10. It just wasn't anything special, and it just wasn't anything good, but at the same time, it just wasn't bad. So just the average rating is what I would give it. Just flat out, it was just a 5. So yeah, that's the first review of the Harry Potter series, but it's the second review in this holistic series. Next week, I'm going to be comparing the first Percy Jackson book and the first Harry Potter book, and we'll just see which one I feel like did more or did enough to win over the other one. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and if you like what you saw, just hopefully you stick around.